President Reagan said the following.
We in America have learned bitter lessons from 2 world wars. It is better to be here ready to protect the peace than to take blind shelter across the sea, rushing to respond only after freedom is lost. We've learned that isolationism never was and never will be an acceptable response to tyrannical governments with an expansionist intent.
Many isolationists opposed Reagan's foreign policy. Reagan rejected their criticism. In fact, he condemned it. Reagan rejected containment and détente. He saw it did not work. He sought to defeat the Soviet Union and its spread of communism, and he did so because he rightly believed that the Soviet Union was a grave threat to our country and our interests. So he pushed back on multiple fronts and in multiple ways. He pushed back against many of the same opponents Donald Trump has right now, the Democrats, the media, the isolationists. President Reagan armed anti-communist freedom fighters against the Soviet Union through what was called the Reagan Doctrine, utilizing covert CIA operations, military training, and billions of dollars in weaponry. The administration's primary efforts spanned several key regions. Afghanistan, the CIA secretly supplied the Mujahideen with billions of dollars in weapons, most notably shoulder-fired Fowler Stinger anti-aircraft missiles. And these weapons successfully neutralized Soviet air superiority, particularly targeting Mi-24 Hind gunships, which changed the tide of the war and forced the Soviet withdrawal in 1989. Nicaragua, the U.S. funded, trained, and armed the Contras to fight and destabilize the Marxist-Sandinista government. Funding was covertly funded through CIA operations. And I know people will talk about Iran, Contra, and so forth and so on, but that was done to take out the communists in Nicaragua. In Angola, in Africa, the administration provided covert military support, including Stinger missiles, to the UNITA rebels fighting against the Soviet and Cuban-backed Marxist government. In Poland and many of the Eastern European countries, in addition to military aid for proxy wars, the CIA engaged in an extensive covert operation to supply the underground Solidarity labor movement with printing equipment, communication gear, and financial support, destabilizing the Soviet-backed communist regime. And I could go on. Reagan rejected peaceful coexistence because he understood that communism was neither peaceful nor did it seek coexistence. It is about controlling countries, then continents, then the world. That's the ideology. The entire basis for the Cold War, Reagan argued, was faulty. It would lead to the defeat of the West and democracy over time. He said communism cannot be contained. It must be defeated. And thanks to Reagan and his great partner, Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher of England, Eastern Europe and the captive nations are free today. 300 million people were liberated. Some of our closest allies today were former Soviet puppet states. The Iranian regime also is a government based on an ideology of expansionism, totalitarianism, and is a grave threat to the West, to the Middle East, Israel and the Arab states, and Europe, but mostly to the United States of America, our country. President Trump is the only president to recognize this and actually do something about it, something big and heroic. But like the Soviet Union, the regime cannot be contained. In fact, its ideological fundamentalism is based on a religious fundamentalism, and it exists to conquer and destroy, not coexist. The Iranian regime cannot be successfully negotiated with, bought off with billions in funds and resources, or paper deals and agreements. The memorandum of understanding was never going to work. Never. No deal is ever going to work because of their ideology, not because of some secret influence campaign by the Israelis. What an outrageous smear. But because of the enemy, the Iranians. 47 years of ripping up deals, 47 years of prolonged negotiations. It's called knowledge and rationality. And once you realize what we are dealing with, the only course is to defeat it. That's right. Defeat it. not just militarily, but you have to pull it up by the roots. You have to destroy it. The isolationists among us, in and out of the administration, are very dangerous, albeit relatively a small group of ideologues of a different sort. They're not prudential. They're not rational. They insist that we stand down while our enemies are on the move. And like the Marxists, all they have are labels and slogans and smears. And like the Marxists, they attack our own country. They accuse our country of supporting forever wars. They accuse our country of being a warmonger and filled with warmongers. If we do not adopt aspects of the Reagan Doctrine and incorporate them into the Trump foreign policy in dealing with Iran, we will not defeat that regime. And that regime will build nuclear weapons and intercontinental missiles, not now perhaps, but the next day, the next year, in 5 years. That's right. And they will use them because that's their ideology. People haven't read what these people say, what their scholars say, what Khomeini said in his little book, his little Mein Kampf, Islamic Government, what he says right here. This is their Bible, if you will. Unlike the old Soviet Union or today's Russia or communist China, the ideology of the Iranian Islamist regime is based on the belief that Allah compels the annihilation of the West, and that dying in service of Allah is martyrdom. Mutual assured destruction is not a deterrence. So how do we eliminate the regime? Well, there's some things we haven't tried for some reason. First, rather than pushing away Israel, we didn't push away Thatcher, we didn't push away Churchill. Rather than pushing away Israel and Netanyahu, we should embrace their military. We should embrace their intelligence expertise in the region, as we did early in this war. Regardless of what the Arab states and Turkey and Pakistan think or what they want, it is in our national security interest to end the Iranian regime as fast as we can, period. Just as Reagan worked with Thatcher, we must continue to work with Netanyahu. He is a strength. He is a strength. Second, our focus should include training, arming, and assisting Iranian opposition groups, as I have said for months, to fight the regime from within that country. The regime fears this most, more than they fear us, which is why it has executed tens of thousands of Iranians and continues to execute anyone who dares to even speak against them. Unless and until we seriously address the internal security apparatus, which we cannot do at 35,000 and 40,000 feet with bombers and jet fighters, that is, namely the Iranian Republican Guard Corps, the regime will not be defeated. The people of Iran are an enormous asset and liberation movement waiting to be supported. These are brave people. They number in the millions, and many of the families there have every reason to take retribution on this regime. Anyone who advises the president that this should not or cannot be done, in my view, should be replaced with military and intelligence leaders who can and will get this done. This is the way we're going to defeat the regime. Not MOUs, not deals, not statements that, well, there are moderates and they regret their last 47 years. You know what that tells me? A complete lack of understanding of what we're dealing with. And I am incredibly proud that our president is taking it to the regime, that he's leading this righteous and noble war for peace against terrorism, despite the isolationists, despite the Democrat Party, despite the quislings in Europe. The Arab monarchs and the Middle East dictators should be told that we will do what we must do, whether they like it or not. Either join us or get out of the way. In the end, they will benefit greatly from what we are doing. And for those who are out there saying Israel's all by itself, it's isolated, that they want forever wars. These are horrible, horrible slanders and libels against that country and our allies. 9 million people, 7 million of whom are Jewish, surrounded by 250 million individuals, many of whom want to destroy them. This type of propaganda is, to me, utterly unacceptable. There's a great piece in Real Clear Politics, Is Israel Actually More Isolated Than Ever, by Rich Goldberg and Roger Zakheim, brilliant men, experts, and they point out Israel has new alliances with, strong alliances with, diplomatic alliances with, and now military alliances with Argentina, Bolivia, Chile, Colombia, the Conservative Party of Canada, the British Tories, Slovenia, Germany, India's Modi. In fact, military delegations have been sent to Israel to buy equipment, to gather intelligence from India and Germany, from Canada, Britain, France, Morocco, Finland, Greece, Cyprus, the Czech Republic, Hungary, Poland, Austria, Estonia, Japan, Romania, Serbia, Slovenia, all came to Israel to learn from its military battlefield lessons and innovations, even as some of its political leaders blast Israel in public. They work with them in private. American conservatives should be buoyed by Israel's rising stock among conservatives worldwide, and polling suggests support remains rock solid in the United States, despite the propaganda you're hearing from some. A recent survey conducted by the Reagan Institute found 80% of MAGA Republicans think Israel's security matters to the United States' security and prosperity, including 63% of those under 30. Over 70% of MAGA Republicans also support sending weapons to Israel, while 60% of Democrats oppose arming Israel. And then that vote last week about cutting off aid to Israel, every Republican but that reprobate Massey voted, no, we don't support that. Half the Democrats said, yes, we do support it. But that part is due to this growing, hideous anti-Semitism in the Democrat Party. And one day they're going to pay a price for that. Because Americans are not anti-Semitic, not red-blooded, patriotic Americans. No way. Now, I want to swing quickly again into the Marxist Islamist movement in our country, this enemy within that is consuming the Democrat Party in a number of our communities. What is missing from most of their propaganda, their agendas, and their ideologies? What's missing? Freedom, free will, individual rights. They almost never talk about it. They constantly talk about groups of people, categories of people, economic classes, oppressed races and oppressor races, but rarely do they talk about individuals and freedom and God-given rights. In fact, they never talk about individual sovereignty, the core of Judeo-Christian and Enlightenment beliefs, and the core of our founding in the Declaration of Independence. The reason is Marxism and Islamism are fundamentally totalitarian ideologies. Individuals are to serve the greater good. And the greater good is whatever these masterminds, self-appointed, say it is. And if the individual has a different opinion or seeks a different path or ignores the masterminds, they will be punished in one form or another. And depending on the nature of the regime, it could lead to torture, imprisonment, or even death in its most aggressive forms. History is filled of examples. School is for indoctrination, not learning or knowledge. Language is for manipulation, not open and free communication. Property is for the masterminds to do as they please. The individual has no rights in property or say in its use. Again, the individual human being is of no consequence. He or she serves the greater good, that is, the state and its masterminds, and whatever they claim the greater good is. Ultimately, there must be thought control. In other words, the masterminds and the state determine what is good, bad, acceptable, banned, or promoted. This is why capitalism or free market commerce is relentlessly denounced and sabotaged. Capitalism is the source of private property. It is the source of individual motivation, boundless creativity, and inventiveness. That is the application of free thinking to human endeavors. Capitalism creates wealth, prosperity, a vibrant middle class, and so forth. You cannot have a successful revolution, you see, if the people think for themselves and are self-sufficient and successful and mostly happy. This is the opposite of the masterminds and the state allocating resources. And they allocate resources based on ideological and political considerations, and most of all, to serve their own power and the power of the state. And they do so in lieu of all the information and knowledge and individual decision-making of a free person. Free individuals who know better than anyone else how to make these decisions. Dead are the profit incentives, the allocation of resources based on supply and demand, rational investment and capital allocation, personal motivation and innovation, and so forth. Smothered. Individual freedom and free will and individual rights cannot exist in the context of a centralized government and police state whose masterminds claim to represent the best interests of society, whether the people like it or not, because in the end, the people have no say whatsoever. These masterminds always talk about what could be, if only the individual would surrender his or her liberty, free will, and property to the state. These masterminds talk constantly about equality. If the kind of equality they mean is the dehumanization of the individual and turning the individual into a so-called worker for the machinery of the state. These masterminds promise abundance and affordability when there are no such things in communist regimes. Indeed, the focus is never on the well-being of the individual, but the power of the state and the masterminds who run them. The Islamist regimes, such as in Iran, and as Khomeini preached, adopt the Marxist economic ideology because it smothers the individual and empowers the state. And the Islamists promote what they call the Islamist government, in which there are also no individual rights, and each person is nothing more than a servant or slave to the cause. We must oppose these inhumane ideologies right here in America, where they are spreading, by making the case for freedom, for free will, individual rights. We must take our magnificent history back from those who pervert it, distort it, and twist it, and use it to undermine our country for their own totalitarian purposes by constantly celebrating it. We must constantly celebrate it and celebrate we the people and those who founded this nation, built this great nation, and those who are doing so today. We must use actual, abundant examples of human suffering and economic dislocation created by these totalitarian demagogues and ideologies. And we must remind our fellow citizens, our family members, and our friends of the unimaginable prosperity and opportunity and civility and freedom our governing and economic systems have provided us. And compare this to the hellholes and the police states and failed societies that the Marxist Islamist propagandists in our country seek to impose on us. We're in a battle of ideas. Let's engage these charlatans, push back, expose them, expose their lies. And they are nothing more than American Marxists and Islamists who seek to empower themselves through manipulation and propaganda.
Be sure to like and subscribe for all the Fox News latest on YouTube and catch full shows streaming now on Fox One.